we might see many more SMEs closing down in food systems or being severely weakened. And this really just perpetuates the high levels of concentration that already exists.
There are definite losers in the system, small-scale farmers and consumers, and definite winners, which are all of the retailers and some of the bigger processors.
And the more I said, the more I realized that no one was going to come up with the solution. All the solutions that I was seeing, at least on all the Zoom calls and Skype calls I was sitting on, was always top down. And no one, to my knowledge, was having the insight and the experience from ground up. No one was on the ground. But even if they could buy the food, all the kota places, the spaza shops, all the food retail in the township was essentially closed. And one of the reasons why most of these places were closed, it was actually an unintended consequence of a top-down systems failure.
Supermarkets are predominantly supplied by large-scale industrial agriculture. We know that that is ecologically unsustainable.
The big issue is supply. You find that when you go into the markets, you go to try and find products. It's very hard to find the product because most of the producers, perhaps they've closed down.
We all know that our food system is broken. And that means not that there isn't sufficient food in the country, but it really means that we have 80% of vulnerable communities being food insecure.
There are structural problems in the food system that existed even before COVID-19. The pandemic has perpetuated these problems, but it also presents opportunities to fast-track interventions that serve to lower the barriers to entry for SMEs.
It regulates in such a way that we can protect the interests of the informal traders.
And we know that if you don't have access to nutritious food, your entire cognitive development as an adult will be impacted, and your potential to live a happy and fulfilled life with a career will be decreased because you haven't had access to the correct nutrition.
So I think it's not so much that the coronavirus pandemic has changed the power relations in the market, but what it has is it's possibly made those power relations more visible. And definitely what it has made visible is the negative implications of that disproportionate allocation of power, and especially in the ability of consumers to access affordable food.
A handful of firms that essentially control these markets at each level. And what that means is that your SMEs that can produce or that could produce more nutritious food or that could serve areas that are otherwise underserved struggle to access or to participate in this value chain in a fair way.
Our mission was to try and ensure that small farmers regain their economic foothold in the marketplace and that the knowledge and choice of local food becomes the norm, not the exception, as it is at the moment.
The biggest challenge has been access versus excess. So there's people who've got great access of things. So there's a lot of restaurants, for example, that closed. So there's essentially great access of food sitting somewhere. But then you go to communities like Diepsloot where there's no food.
In a way, COVID-19 has forced us to rethink market-shaping policies to create more resilient food systems that are more inclusive, that are more diverse, that have a good mix of SMEs, medium-sized and large-sized firms.
And what we're seeing is that the COVID-19 pandemic has quickly become a hunger crisis.
So when we shut down the informal sector, we not only deprived consumers of access to food, what we did is we deprived a great deal of small farmers from their access to market.
I expect to finalize the regulation that regulates the informal traders. I expect that. Okay. We've been on a research kind of research with government in 2017, 2018. We were deep in research, but it has went back, but nothing has happened. I expect them to come up with a bylaw that will finally make us be able to trade.
To create a competitive digital space that would curb concerns of market power of certain dominant platforms that might emerge out of this.
But price is an absolute critical component of food and food accessibility. If you think about it, you can buy a burger for cheaper than you can buy a kilo of broccoli. So there's something wrong somewhere.
I think the only way we're going to have a more equitable food system is if there's a conscious effort to redesign one.
If you're poor, food is a chore. If you are well off, food is an experience. Getting food out is about just sustenance.
It's not a question of market failure. It's a question, a much more fundamental question. It is whether this commodification of food, whether or not a system where profit is the only reason to determine whether or not someone has access to food or not, is actually the kind of system that this country needs. You know, and I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to say, no, it isn't.
And we're optimistic that more people in the future will recognize that in order to have a resilient supply of local food, local farmers need to be supported all year round.
So in a nutshell, what I think is one of the biggest problems in our food system is that you've got these high levels of concentration. It means that it hinders participation at different levels. And then it results in this kind of dual food system. The big players that can supply through the supermarket chains, the smaller players that are forced or sort of marginalized to supply through alternative routes to markets, and never being given a chance to build their capabilities to meet some of the requirements to supply, for example, the supermarket chains.
Issue of markets, we have been fighting it for almost 4 years now, but we haven't seen good results. And mainly it's owed to changing of administration politically, which has caused us not to see the right results. But we hope that the city of Cape Town will come into our play and really offer us a power to trade.